Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Legal Briefs, simulcast on CP24, nationally on Court TV Canada. I'm Lorne Honickman. Well, he's one of the world's best-known death row inmates, and he has just a few short hours left to live. 51-year-old Stanley Tookie Williams will die by lethal injection at 1 minute past midnight, just a few hours from now, California time. The co-founder of the notorious Crip Street gang in California killed 4 people in 1979. All appeals to block his execution failed, and today Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger refused to grant clemency.
I feel pained by the governor's decision to choose revenge over redemption and to use Tookie Williams as a trophy in this flawed system.
Death penalty opponents and Hollywood stars mounted a campaign to try and save his life because of Williams' work in prison to steer kids away from gang culture. This case, of course, has reignited the debate about capital punishment on both sides of the border. You may not know this, but it's been 43 years ago, just yesterday, that 2 men were hanged here in Toronto. It's the last time the death penalty was used in Canada. It's been 29 years since it was officially abolished by Parliament. Joining me tonight to talk about this is Dave Parkinson. He's from the Canadian Coalition Against the Death Penalty. Welcome, Dave.
Thanks for having me.
Now, it's unbelievable. Is there really a need for your organization? Maybe that's not the nicest way to welcome somebody, but while we watch what goes on south of the border, is it not a, pardon the pun, a dead issue here in Canada?
Well, no, unfortunately, it's not. As you probably know, the vast majority of Canadians still support a return to capital punishment.
Something like what, 53% of Canadians in the most recent polls?
Yeah, before that, it was in the low to mid-60s as well, just back in the 1990s. And there have been issues here in Canada. There was a case of William Sampson, who was wrongfully convicted in Saudi Arabia, facing capital punishment. A few years ago, Stan Falder, who ended up being executed in Texas. So from time to time, the death penalty unfortunately rears its ugly head in Canada, whether it's in the form of Canadians being sentenced to death abroad or calls from politicians here to have it reinstated.
Right. And there are Canadians, are there? There's one Canadian right now in Illinois, is there not, awaiting a death penalty?
Yeah, there was one individual. He actually contacted our organization. He was born originally in Canada, but had since, I guess, become a naturalized U.S. citizen.
Okay, I see.
But we did actually help him contact our government to get his credentials to prove his Canadian citizenship originally.
Is there, besides the fact that there still seems to be a majority of Canadians, and every once in a while, I remember, I guess it was the old Reform Party, it was called back then, wanted a free vote, a referendum in this country. But politically, we don't hear it anymore, but we watch what goes on south of the border. The criticism, and I'm sure we'll hear it tonight, is that the Americans in the states that do it in America are doing it right, that that's the way to deal with the old eye for an eye type of adage. You don't agree with that?
No, certainly not. And just November 15th, the 122nd death row prisoner who was wrongfully convicted was released. That was Harold Wilson.
How many have there been?
122 since reinstatement in 1977 have been released from death row who've been exonerated through DNA. And Harold Wilson, we actually had a webpage for him, and he was in Pennsylvania. He contacted us back at the end of '98, beginning of '99. And we had a webpage in which he discussed his issues of innocence. And it was just November 15th of this year that he became the 122nd prisoner released.
And I guess that would be the argument. If there was any really compelling argument, when this debate arises as tonight, as we await another person who will be put to death, is the wrongly convicted. And the Supreme Court of Canada recently talked about this in a case dealing with whether or not, and there's a shot, by the way, that's a live shot outside San Quentin prison as a vigil gathers there, and of course it will grow in numbers, awaiting the execution of Tookie Williams. The interesting part, of course, is that there is one last appeal, we understand, to the U.S. Supreme Court. There always seems to be in the United States, you hear this, it's like it's 10 to 12, it's 5 to 12. But assuming that the U.S. Supreme Court does not do anything or does not intervene at all, Mr. Williams will be put to death by lethal injection at about 12:01 a.m. That will be California time. Getting back to the Canadian side of this, recently the Supreme Court of Canada dealt with the issue about what do we do here in Canada about extraditing people to face the death penalty, whether that infringes their charter rights here in Canada. And there have been conflicting decisions through the years. But the court said, this is the first words of this judgment, where in this particular judgment, the court found that Canada must get that assurance. In this particular case, what is it? It's Raffay and Burns?
Raffay and Burns.
Raffay and Burns. The court's first words on this were, legal systems have to live with the possibility of error. The unique feature of capital punishment is that it puts beyond recall the possibility of correction. And that always seems to be the problem, isn't it, when you think of it? And how many again, just so we'll keep putting that number
122.
122.
And those are just the ones that the court found innocent through DNA testing. And there's numerous other issues, jailhouse snitches, eyewitness identification gone wrong. And that's just 122 that have been discovered and exonerated through the courts. There's many, many more in there.
And of course, there's been many people, more of course, who are convicted, who are rightly convicted. And the families out there who will be watching tonight as they listen to you and they look south of the border will be saying, I am certain, because it's coming from the gut, that's what should be happening here. That person took the life of my loved one. Why should he sit in prison for 25 years, be eligible for parole perhaps in 10 years in this country if it's second-degree murder, and yet my loved one will never walk again, whatever it is? One only has to think of the Bernardo case, for example. So how do you deal with that emotional response that you must get all the time?
Well, certainly. I mean, the first impulse if someone was to hurt my family or my child, my first impulse would be to want to kill the individual myself. But, you know, upon the realization that I'm not a murderer, I would not be expecting my court system, my justice system, elected officials to be committing a murder on my behalf to make me feel better. I mean, the justice system is there to protect society. And if an individual can be locked up, and if they're really that bad, they throw away the key and now protect society, well, there's no need for any more bloodshed.
All right, well, we're going to talk about this because I want to go to the numbers, but there's another part of sentencing in this country, and that's the punitive aspect and the deterrent aspect, and I talk a lot about that as well. So what do you think about this? As we wait, as we are hours away from another person being put to death in the United States, the debate now continues with respect to the death penalty. Should we even be talking about it here in Canada? Has it been put to bed, or does this raise the issue again? We want to get from you your comments, your questions. Here's how to reach us. Within Toronto, dial 416-872-2724. From anywhere in the country, call us toll-free 1-888-863-2724. Fax us at 416-593-6397. If you're watching us on the internet, send your email to legalbriefs@pulse24.com. We're going to take a break here, and we'll be back to take your calls and questions as we raise the debate again about capital punishment. Stay with us.